Hello and welcome to another one of Bridge Burner's tutorials for Ultimate Doombuilder, and this time we are going to be going through some tips and techniques to assist with architectural precision in building kind of complex shapes, which I think a few people have been waiting for. It's been on the list for a while, we're finally getting to it, and yeah, we're going to cover off good rotate using line splitting, how to use the edit mode for rotational symmetry, and a little bit of diving into flat alignment, which is something that I do a lot of and can be very hard if you don't know how to use the tools, but a lot easier once you master it. So yeah, let's get into it. So we'll start off with a circle, my favorite shape, and I will keep that size. So I have covered off this a little bit in the ellipse tool tutorial, but we'll cover it off again. Depending on the number of sides of the ellipse, it'll severely impact how easy it is to copy paste things around it. So a 24-sided ellipse, each rotation of the when you use the edit mode like that is 15 degrees. So you'll see that will line up perfectly. Copy it twice, so rotate it around, lines up perfectly. 15-degree rotations on the snap. You'll notice when you are in edit mode, you go into the docker here on the right hand side, it'll tell you the rotational amount you've gone. So 30 degrees, one more, 45. So it's going 15 degrees each time. Now you can manually input that number. So key is to use a ellipse of multiples of 4 sides. Otherwise the line lengths will be different, and I'll just quickly demonstrate this again. As I said, it was in the ellipse tool tutorial. So we've got a 22-sided ellipse here. Line length there is 145.73, 145.85, 146.17. All of these lines are different lengths. It will severely hamper your ability to make very precise geometry. It's not the end of the world if you're just drawing a circle and you're just going to have a circle. But if you're wanting to be precise and build off this shape, disaster. So make sure you're starting off with a multiple of 4 on the sides up here. If you wanted, say, a 5-sided shape, you'd start with 20 and then delete vertices. 300.95 is the length of every one of those lines. If I do a 5-sided shape, 311.17, 302.46, 316.43, different. Now, if you wanted to rotate a shape around these points you've drawn, say a little triangle like that, the standard rotation snap won't line up, but you can manually input stuff. So 5 sides, 360 degrees divided by 5 is 72. 72-degree rotation lines up perfectly. Positive 72 on that side, lines up perfectly. 144, oops, lines up perfectly. So pick numbers that divide into 360 easily is important, and a variety of them do. So you can get, depending on the size of your shape, you can definitely find an ellipse to work for you. So 24 is a good one to work with for big stuff. It's big enough vertices to give you nice detail, but not so many that you end up with a way over production of lines. If you're getting into smaller circles, 16 is a good number. Or 12 for very small ellipses as well. So say you wanted to put another small ellipse off tangential from one of these lines. First thing you want to do is find the center. So there is a line splitting function, but I use the curve line tool, which operates the same way. You can roll the mouse wheel to change the number of vertices. You see the number in the top left and top of the screen up there changing. 1 vertice, angle of 0, will split the line perfectly in half. 66.83, both halves. Do that on the other ones. Nice and easy. So that's the function that I use. I know there is a line split tool that other people use, does the same thing, but I use the curve line tool. Now, this is where the grid rotate comes in. So you may have just seen the grid flip there. This is the key that you have to bind under controls. It's called Smart Grid Transform. This does everything for you. What it will do is, depending on the mode you're on, it'll move the grid. There's your default. If you're in vertice mode, highlight a vertice, it will align to that point. The grid origin will move there. See, it moves to wherever I want it. If you're in line mode, it will align as well. So you see it switches. So when you use the line def mode, it'll actually rotate the whole thing to align with that line, and the origin will line up with the vertice closest to your cursor. See, bring it over here to that cursor, it'll align with that one. Bring it over here, it'll align with that one. Bring it over here, it'll align with that one. So if you've aligned it with the wrong one and you want to move it, or you want it on that plane and you just want to shift it around, highlight the vertice, align, it will recenter on that vertice. Recenter on that vertice. Recenter on that vertice. So that is a feature that came in 2019, I think, and has really made building radial geometry a lot easier. So now you want to put a pillar over here. We're going to draw a square pillar. So you see I've aligned it with that vertice. We've come out 256 to the center there. Turn that into a pillar. Now you've got nice lined up, centered, set distance, nice grid number coming from there. You've got a pillar. We'll give it a little border. So I'll use that for later. Change that black so you can see it. Give you another texture. Use that one there. Yay, pillar. Cool. Now you want that pillar around the circle. What I do, so there are a couple of ways to get an accurate relative position. One way, and this is works with a radial copy paste. Put a thing, anything, in the center of your area. Finding that center can be difficult, but it has to be the center. But what you can do, highlight what you're copy pasting, sector mode, move to thing mode, grab that, copy, rotate, and then recenter the thing. So you've got the same relative position using that thing that you've placed. It could be anything. And that gives you a reference point to copy to. Like so. And then once you've done a few, you can do the lot and do it on bulk. And this will give you very quickly repeating geometry. Now, obviously, you don't want to do this. You want to minimize your copy pasting, so you want to kind of finalize your detailing before you do all of this stuff. You still want to get like a broad shape and check that you're happy with things. But then you'll okay, we'll go back to the original one, detail it up some more, and then copy paste those details around. But that is one way to get your nice accurate patterning. So you've got 209 distance there, 209 distance, 209 distance, same distance the whole way around. The other way to do it, and this is actually the way that I normally do it more commonly, is draw a reference line. Doesn't matter from where to where, as long as it's two consistent vertice points. So pick a point on the thing you want to copy paste, pick a point on the thing you're copy pasting around, draw the line between the two, highlight the whole edifice, including the line, and now you've got that reference point that you can then merge with the vertices, because when you're copy pasting, it will snap to vertices if you've got that set. I think that's... You will have to potentially check... It's one of these functions, sorry. There's a function that specifically says snap to... I can't remember where it is. There is a snap to geometry setting. If it's not snapping to the vertice, you'll have to check that. Delete the lines once you're done. You've got your repeating shapes. Now, one thing you do have to be careful of is if you have got the grid aligned, sometimes it's better than it used to be. Sometimes it will snap to weird locations. It won't draw to the point where you want it. It'll occasionally align with the original grid locations. It is a lot better than it used to be, and it tends to get more of an issue as your map gets bigger and more complex, and rounding errors come into things. So when you're starting off from the grid, it's fine, but if you're starting off grid with that base shape, it can end up aligning with some slightly off points. Got to be careful, got to be vigilant. You often find out that you've got a whole lot of really finely overlapping vertices if you're not careful. That only happens when you're using the grid a rotated grid, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. What was next? Right, another little trick for positioning things accurately. Say you wanted some pillars on this inside area, centered on these vertices here. So say we wanted a little pillar, like so. You can use that point to align with here. If it's blocked out like that, you've already deleted it, turn it into a pillar, you can put a thing in the middle. Same deal as before. Copy that. And then align that with that vertex. It will snap to it. Like so. Or you can center your grid on that and then draw it manually. That isn't always the best option. If you're doing, say, it depends on the number of vertices around the ellipse, you can end up with some slightly odd or different relative positions. So you see you've got the short line on that side, over here it's on that side. That can make it hard to do things like draw beams between and then copy paste them around. So you see it's aligning on a side there and it's aligning on a vertex there. So I would advise to always rotate, even if it doesn't seem like you need to. Always rotate your shapes to match as they're going around the circle, because you never know what kind of design you might change your mind about what you're building. It'll make life a lot easier if you keep doing that as opposed to just drawing it on each location. Right. So we talked about reference lines. We talked about using things as a reference point. One useful thing to note is that if you rotate your grid, the ellipse tool will rotate with it, which is very handy. So it will actually follow that new orientation, which is probably more handy for things like the draw grid mode. It sets drawing on that orientation. Reset back to the base grid. So that's really, really handy. You can use all the various functions, even if you're on the rotated grid, all the draw functions. They all work fine, which is fantastic. Right, so that's how you kind of copy paste your things around the circle. Next thing we were going to look at was how to use the alignment tools. So what we're going to do is split out some that border. Now, in order to align, because we'll also do a circle, you need to miter the joint, which is a construction term, and essentially you need to find the middle of the angle. No matter what that angle is, find where it's the midway point divided in two, and that's where your texture change is going to happen. So we'll use this one that has, actually might use something that's a little bit more noticeable, like this texture here. The horizontal vision. There we go. Right, so say you wanted a nice trim around this pillar. Control A is your texture alignment for both X and Y. It works on walls and flats, unless in UDMF. A is X, Shift A is Y, Control A is both. Control A is what you want to use for your flat alignment. And what it does is the line that your cursor is closest to, it will align the top of the texture to that line, like so. So if I get closer to this angled one, it will align there. Like so. Bang, 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 done. So I wanted a different one up here. You might go for one of the marbs. There's some nice marble textures that have interesting patterns on them here. Same again. And you notice if I put it close to that line, it actually flips it facing the other way. Easy peasy. Control A. That's all you need to know. So we'll do a circle. And now here's a useful function in Stair Builder. So you could draw it manually, drawing it a small circle on the side, and then do the miters between vertex to vertex, or you can use the Stair Builder, which has a built-in function, distinct sectors. So that will automatically draw lines between the vertices. Very, very, very handy. That one. So one thing to note though, when using it on ellipses that you've drawn, there is a slight difference to manually drawing the ellipse. So when you draw the ellipse here, you've got 32 difference between the vertices. Here, it is between the lines. And that doesn't seem like it matters much, but it does change the line length here, 32.63. Not a huge deal a lot of the time, but say you wanted to build something that was a specific distance inside this shape, you notice that this vertice is now off grid. Keep that in mind. For this reason, I generally manually draw my ellipses and then draw in the separations, unless it's just a pure trim around something that I'm already pretty close to finishing. I very much prefer that. It keeps these on grid at the apexes, and it's easy to draw iterative circles and know where they're going to end up. There are some cases where it's better to do it this way, but we're getting into pretty edge case kind of stuff that is not the topic of this podcast. But we can use this to now draw. Just going to highlight all those, put a texture in them. We will go for another metal one, I think. Go for the wider one. There we go. 32 wide. Same thing. Go around the circle, lining up with the inside edge. Align, align, align. Doot, like that. Done. Piece of cake. So yeah, it is actually really easy to do this kind of thing once you get in the workflow. Yeah, it looks like when I do this kind of stuff, I spend a lot of time doing it, and I do, but it's actually not as time consuming as it might appear at first glance once you get the hang of these tools. Now, it all changes a little bit if you're on slopes. So say we had a section coming out of these pillars on the ceiling maybe. We'll merge these, bring that down, and we'll put a slope here. And this is often what you'll have with this kind of, with this kind of radial shape. You'll have a slope section. You might have a beam coming back to the central structure, like so, something like that. Cool, cool, cool. You can also align on the slope. So I copied the texture across, and then Control A, same thing on the bottom here. Now, what that does do is scales the texture as well. So it automatically scales it, which generally is not a problem. It gets it pretty close to the right visual scale when you see it in game. Like that looks about the same resolution as that. You'll notice if it's not, it's very stretched. Looks kind of weird, especially once you get steeper. Very stretched. But then you align it, yeah, it's not so bad. And you can do fairly precise aligning. So you wanted to do have that same trim texture, aligned. Again, it aligns with the edge closest to your cursor. So by putting it close to this edge, even though it's a horizontal texture that I've used, instead of running horizontally, it's aligned vertically. If you wanted to do the vertical one, you would align it with the base like that. which can be handy because you might want to align it with that down there. Like so. Now say you wanted a light in the middle there. This is where the auto scale gets a bit fritzy. So first you need to kind of guess, based on the slope you've got, how big a texture that you're going to use. For 32, so we use a 128 texture for the light, the OTEX ones. Use this lovely red one here. This is where you see where the auto scale doesn't always give you exactly what you want. It's cut off the bottom. So it's got it looking pretty close, but not quite right. We've lost a bit of the texture. Now there are a couple of ways to deal with this. You can move to the visual mode in 2D that shows that texture, because it's ceiling, and you can move this texture until you find, move this line until you find the edge and line it up. That's great if you don't really care too much about its relative position, but also at that point you can then shift it over and get it better centered. It's going to be about there. Of course that throws off the slope, so have to readjust that. Pretty well aligned. Not a bad way to do it, not quite the best way. So we'll go back to our original position. It's like, nope, we want a light that big. This is where the alignment function comes in. So I've got these bound to Alt-C and Alt-F, but they're over here on the left-hand side, floor align mode and ceiling align mode. What this does, demonstrate here on a flat surface first. Oops. F brings up a square that is the same, or doesn't have to be a square, it is the same size as the texture that you have highlighted. And you can move it around, so you see it shifting. This corner here is something that you can pin to a vertice, or a line, or a grid point, anything. You can rotate it, grabbing one of these handles, spinning it around, so rotate. You can also line it up with a vertex. Anywhere. Or anywhere on screen at least. So if you want to have it pointing in a certain direction and extrapolate out a line, you can line it up with that point. Haven't found that handy too often, but in certain cases I have found that very useful. Now this is obviously not as fast as the auto align in general situations. But what it is really handy for, and I discovered this relatively recently, is scaling slopes. Same thing. Go like that. You can see it's already truncated. So before you do that, you want to make sure that your grid is aligned with where you want to put that particular texture. So we've got the grid line there. Because you're going to use the stretch function that's built into this. You can stretch the texture. And what you want to do is put the line in line with where you want that texture to now end. Absolutely perfectly aligned. The best way to precisely align things like lights on slopes. Say you're not happy with that kind of stretch. Okay, we'll just move it over a little bit. Stretch that out. Align with the top. So it just gets it in the right position. So it's at least aligned with one line. Same deal. Alt-C is my hotkey. Realign it. Rescale it. Bang. You see that top bar is now much closer to the side in terms of its stretch, because before it was looking a little bit squished compared to that side. So okay, cool, we want to stretch it out a little bit, and there we go. And yeah, that is immensely useful. So say now you're like, oh, cool, I want that everywhere. Grab all this, everything you want to copy paste. We know this is already on the right rotations, 15 degrees, bang, bang. Like so. That's overridden that. So we've already drawn that, so that's fine. It's just the override function being a bit fritzy there. And then you go around, realign stuff, Control A. Control A is all round. My control key bounced out of the keyboard. That's not good. So you'll see me doing this a lot on my maps. Going around, tidying things up, making sure it's all nicely aligned. There we go, do the lights again. Cool, we want these to be, remember to align the grid first. So, switch you like that. Is it in the right place? I think that is. Same with this one, align the grid. Go away, color picker, we don't want you. Align the grid there. Alt-C. Stretch. Done. Yeah, that's a large part of what makes radial geometry look really good, is getting that regular, exact locations, and it also makes it a lot easier to build. You're not having to, like, so say you wanted to copy, paste, rotate one of these things you've made, and you're just trying to guess it. You'd be like, no, that's not quite in line. Yeah, that's kind of in line there, maybe. Close enough. Oh, it's kind of in the center. Like, you can get it pretty close. But it takes a lot of fiddling, and then you get this kind of shit happening. Little lines popping up, not quite merged properly. If you're dealing with a lot of slopes and lines aren't perfectly parallel, you'll end up with things kind of looking a bit twisted. You'll get some visual artifacts happening that'll bug you, and again, it just makes life more difficult. So starting off accurately means that you'll keep being accurate. If that circle had started off not quite a perfect ellipse, had been a 22-sided one, all of this gets a lot harder right from the word go. So it's important to start well and start accurately, and then that carries through. Inevitably, once you get into big complex maps, you'll find that the rounding errors will creep in, and this is nothing you can do about it. It'll just happen. You'll find vertices will start overlapping, even though you can't see them. It's inevitable. So you want to start as well as you can to hold that point back as long as possible. But even with something like Bastion of Chaos, which ended up 140,000 lines, there was not much of that issue cropping up in that build. It's happened more on a couple of my other maps where I've got more off-grid stuff happening. Essentially, the more off-grid you go and the longer you stay off it, the more rounding errors you'll end up with. If you keep resetting back to the base grid, so every time you draw a new ellipse, cool, it's going back to the base grid, you will minimize those kinds of errors creeping into the calculations. But something like Hexstone Citadel, which is 95% off-grid, I think, 94%, I had a lot of issues, even copy-pasting simple hexagons, perfectly even-sided hexagons, just pasting them around. They eventually started creeping to a point where they weren't quite lining up, and there'd be one or two vertices on each one that I'd have to go and fiddle with to realign. But yeah, that's I think that covers off some of the real key concepts that are what I use for architectural precision. Using the split tool to find the centers of lines, always very, very handy. That's where you start off well, making sure that you're working from the middle of a point. You can use that to find thirds, quarters. Say you wanted the middle half, delete the line. You've got a nicely split evenly thing, and you can build off there. Sometimes you don't want to necessarily work from the center. You want to have an even separation. You can use that tool to separate it out to however many segments you want. That's just rolling the mouse wheel while holding shift. So you start with that, begin with accurate ellipses, and life will be a lot easier. I will say one thing before we finish up regarding the curve tool. If you're using this to make your curves, there are certain points where it will be a regular ellipse. The angle of 180 is half of a sphere. Sorry, not a sphere, a circle. And you want to make sure that your vertice number matches up with that rule of 4. So 8 vertices is 9 sides, 9 vertices is 10 sides, 11 vertices, 12 sides. That's the right number. So it's a multiple of 4. Took that off. 215.11, all the same length, all nice and even. You can use that the same way as you use an ellipse that you've drawn in terms of the way that you copy paste it. If you've done it at a different size, you just like, curve about there, because sometimes you do. sorry, these will be the same length because the curve tool is good like that, but they won't be on the right angles for copy pasting and rotating. So be careful with the curve tool if you're trying to do something that's radially patterned. It will be more difficult. I should probably actually break out and find some of those magic numbers in terms of the angle for when you can do precise copy pastes. If you are trying to do a copy paste and get it to align, do have a play. You might find that there is a number that lines up. So you line it up, you get it close, and then have a look at what this value is. Okay, it's minus 20.9. So if we go minus 20, which way does it go? It goes back the other way. Cool, so maybe minus 21. Getting pretty close. 2. You might get lucky. We've gone a little bit too far, and it can take fractions. Even though it doesn't show it, it will actually accept fractional values. But so we're getting very close, but not quite. So that's the kind of problems you'll run into. I have gotten lucky with those rotation values sometimes, so it's worth experimenting. You know, hundredths of a degree, you might get it right. And then once you know the number, well, you just keep going. So do play with that if you have done it this way. You can at least get it pretty close, but often in that case, it's just easier to build each one individually, find the centers, and then go from there. We've got some beams coming off here. Of course, Doombuilder's going to do that. So it can be done. You just generally have to manually draw them, but you can still find the middle, start from a point of accuracy, and go from there. Yeah, so that's all we're going to cover off today. If there's any follow-on requests from this tutorial in terms of further exploration of concepts, I will do a follow-up for this because I think architectural precision is something that people will be interested in, and obviously I've got a bit of experience with it. So any questions, put them in the YouTube comments, talk to me on Discord, send me a message on Twitter, whatever, and if I can get enough of them, then I can bundle it up to another tutorial to explore some other ideas. So thank you all for watching. I hope that is helpful, and you will all go now make completely accurate and precise maps with 0 errors, and everything will be fine and glorious. We'll catch you next time. Cheers.